On the 6th of November, 2023, at a desert airfield in California, an aircraft left the ground for the first time. There was no press conference, no countdown, no cameras invited. A single grainy photograph would eventually leak out. A dark, angular shape climbing into a gray morning sky. And for months afterward, that was the only proof most of the world had that it was real at all. That aircraft is the B-21 Raider. And in the summer of 2026, something happened that has almost never happened in the history of American air power. A combat pilot, not a test pilot, not an engineer, a warfighter pulled straight from an operational squadron, climbed into the cockpit of a bomber that is still, officially, years from entering service. He flew it. He landed it. And the message that sent rippling through defense ministries in Beijing and Moscow was not subtle at all. America is not waiting for this bomber to be ready. America is already deciding how to fight a war with it. This is the story of the aircraft that will end the era of the B-2 Spirit, the story of a bomber so classified that even the officers testing it are only shown pieces of what it can actually do. And the story of why, right now in 2026, the United States Air Force is racing to build it faster than any stealth bomber in history has ever been built. This is the bomber America won't let anyone see. To understand the urgency behind the B-21, you have to understand the aircraft it is replacing, and the number that has haunted American strategic planning for 30 years, 21. That is how many B-2 Spirits were ever built. Not 200. Not 100. 21 aircraft, each one costing so much that Congress simply stopped buying more, leaving the United States with the smallest strategic bomber fleet relative to its global commitments in modern memory. For 3 decades, that fleet was enough, because nothing else in the sky could touch it. But strategic deterrence is not a static equation. It is a race, and by the middle of the 2020s, 2 developments had permanently changed the terms of that race. The first was simple mathematics. 19 of those 21 B-2s are still flying combat and deterrence missions today, more than 3 decades after the type first entered service. Airframes older than most of the pilots now flying them, maintained at extraordinary cost, patched and upgraded, because there has never been enough of them to allow any to simply retire. The second development was China. For years, rumors circulated of a Chinese answer to the B-2, a long-range stealth bomber designated the H-20, discussed in state media, hinted at in propaganda renderings, promised as proof that China was closing the gap in strategic air power. And yet, as of 2026, that aircraft has never flown. Not once. The head of United States Air Force Global Strike Command has described China's current bomber capability, bluntly, as a regional force at best. Beijing's own projected timeline for a true stealth bomber has slipped into the next decade, that gap. A fielded, flying, combat-testing American stealth bomber on one side and an unflown rendering on the other is precisely the kind of advantage a nation cannot afford to sit on, because gaps like that do not stay open forever. And the United States Air Force has made a decision that reflects exactly that understanding. Do not wait for the B-21 to be perfect. Get it into the hands of the people who will fly it to war now, while the advantage is still wide open. The B-21 program was built, from its very first design review, around a lesson the Air Force learned the hard way from the B-2. The Spirit was a masterpiece of stealth engineering, and a nightmare of cost, complexity, and fragility. Its radar-absorbent skin required climate-controlled hangars. Its production process was so exquisitely handcrafted that each aircraft took years and hundreds of millions of dollars beyond its already staggering price tag. It was, in the words of engineers who studied its legacy, a bomber that proved American stealth technology worked, and then almost proved that no one could afford to build enough of it to matter. The Raider was designed to break that curse. From day one, Northrop Grumman built the B-21 using digital engineering. Computer modeling so advanced that critical failure points could be identified and corrected before a single physical part was manufactured. The company invested more than $5 billion into digital infrastructure, model-based engineering tools, and software systems connected to the program, dramatically cutting the certification timelines that had once added years to stealth aircraft development. But the truly radical decision came from the Air Force Rapid Capabilities Office, and it is a decision almost no other classified aircraft program in history has made. The prototypes used for flight testing were not simplified test mules built on temporary tooling the way most experimental aircraft are. They were built on the exact same production line, using the exact same manufacturing processes as the operational bombers that will eventually go to war. Every lesson learned in a test flight over the Mojave Desert can be applied immediately to aircraft already moving down the same assembly line, because it is, quite literally, the same line. The results have stunned even people inside the program. In May of 2026, Northrop Grumman announced that the B-21 Combined Test Force had completed a developmental flight test campaign originally scheduled to take 180 days, in just 73. Barely half the planned test missions were needed to validate the aircraft, an outcome so far outside historical norms for a new stealth bomber that former Air Force test personnel called it, essentially, unprecedented. Then came the moment that made the rest of the world sit up. On June 11, 2026, Edwards Air Force Base confirmed that the B-21 had flown with an operational test pilot in the cockpit, a warfighter pulled from a combat squadron, not a career test pilot, sharing controls with a graduate of the Air Force Test Pilot School. In the entire modern history of American aircraft testing, an operational pilot has never been brought into a program this early. The officer overseeing the test force did not mince words about why. They wanted to evaluate the bomber's true combat utility, not just whether it could fly in a straight line. Behind this acceleration sits a number that tells its own story. On February 23, 2026, the Air Force and Northrop Grumman agreed to redirect $4.5 billion in already approved funding specifically to increase B-21 production capacity by 25%, before the aircraft has even entered full operational service. That is not the behavior of a program hedging its bets. That is the behavior of a service that has decided exactly how much of this bomber it wants and has stopped waiting to go get it. Here is what the Air Force will confirm publicly about the B-21 Raider, and it is remarkably little for an aircraft this consequential. It is a subsonic, long-range stealth bomber. It is dual-capable, meaning it can deliver both conventional and nuclear weapons, a distinction that places it in one of the most exclusive and strategically significant categories of aircraft on Earth. It is designed to be cheaper per unit than the B-2 it replaces, and built in far greater numbers, with a minimum inventory objective of at least 100 aircraft and senior commanders openly pushing Congress for more. But the true technical story of the B-21 is not found in what it carries. It is found in what it doesn't need. Senior Air Force leaders have revealed that the Raider consumes a fraction of the fuel required by the legacy bombers it replaces. That single detail sounds almost mundane next to talk of stealth coatings and nuclear payloads. And it may be the most consequential engineering decision in the entire program. In a Pacific theater conflict, distance is the enemy, tanker aircraft. The vulnerable, unglamorous planes that keep bombers fueled across thousands of miles of open ocean are a limiting factor that adversaries specifically plan to target, because eliminating the tanker means grounding the bomber without ever needing to touch it. A bomber that needs dramatically less tanker support doesn't just save fuel. It removes an entire category of vulnerability that a rival war planner was counting on exploiting. In April of 2026, the Air Force confirmed the B-21 had completed its first aerial refueling trials, connecting with a KC-135 Stratotanker over Edwards Air Force Base. Proof that the aircraft has already moved beyond basic airworthiness testing into genuine long-range mission validation, the kind of testing that matters for a bomber meant to fly from the continental United States to a target on the other side of the planet without ever landing. And here is the detail that should genuinely unsettle a rival planner, the one buried far deeper than fuel efficiency or stealth coating. The B-21 was designed from its very first blueprint to be an open architecture system, a digital backbone built to accept new sensors, new software, new weapons, and new mission systems for decades, without requiring the kind of total redesign that eventually froze the B-2 in the technological era it was born into. The B-2 was, in a very real sense, a snapshot of 1980s stealth science locked in amber the day production ended. The B-21 was built specifically so that it never has to be. Every year it flies, it can be quietly and visibly updated to counter whatever new radar, whatever new missile, whatever new air defense system an adversary spends the next decade building. That is the truly terrifying part for anyone trying to plan around this aircraft. It's not just what the B-21 can do on the day it enters service. It's that the version rolling off the line in 2035 will be a fundamentally different, more dangerous machine than the one flying test patterns over the Mojave Desert today. And no rival intelligence service will ever get a clear current picture of exactly what changed. The B-21's acceleration lands at a moment when the entire concept of a bomber gap has been thrown into stark relief. On one side, an American stealth bomber that has flown, refueled mid-air, completed a compressed flight test campaign months ahead of schedule, and put an actual combat pilot in its cockpit. All while second production funding boost pushes output 25% higher before the plane has even reached its first operational wing. On the other side, China's H-20, a program discussed for over a decade, rendered in state propaganda for years, and which, as of 2026, has not produced a single confirmed flight. The Pentagon's own recent assessment of Chinese military power reportedly did not mention the aircraft at all, a silence that speaks louder than any renderings Beijing has released. This is precisely the kind of asymmetry that reshapes deterrence calculations far beyond the aircraft itself. A functioning, flying, rapidly scaling stealth bomber changes what an adversary has to defend against, and it changes it years before the bomber is formally declared combat ready. Because uncertainty about exactly how ready it already is becomes its own strategic weapon. Every radar operator, every air defense planner in a potential adversary's command structure now has to build contingencies around an aircraft whose true capabilities remain classified, whose numbers are actively growing, and whose test program has already outpaced every projection made about it. For America's allies, the message lands differently but no less powerfully. The B-21 is being positioned as the backbone of a modernized long-range strike fleet precisely because it solves the logistics problem that has quietly worried Indo-Pacific war planners for years. A strike aircraft that depends less on vulnerable forward tanker infrastructure capable of holding targets at risk across the vast distances of the Pacific theater without the traditional chain of exposed refueling points an adversary could target first. And this is the part of the story that rarely makes it into the headlines about stealth coatings and payload capacity. The B-21 was never just a replacement for the B-2. It is a statement about industrial pace, proof that the country which once needed decades and hundreds of billions of dollars to build a handful of stealth bombers has relearned how to build them fast, cheap relative to their predecessor, and in numbers that actually matter. That lesson, more than any single technical specification, is what changes calculations in Beijing and Moscow. It is not just the bomber. It is the demonstrated ability to build the next one, and the one after that faster than anyone thought possible. There is a version of this story that ends with a single dramatic reveal. A curtain pulled back, a spotlight, a room full of reporters seeing the full aircraft for the first time. That is not this story. This story ends the way it began, quietly, in a hangar in the California desert, with an aircraft that most of the world will still know almost nothing about even after it enters service. That is not a failure of the program. That is the program working exactly as intended. Because the B-2 taught the United States Air Force a hard lesson about what happens when a strategic advantage becomes too rare, too expensive, and too slow to build. The B-21 Raider is the answer to that lesson. Built faster, tested harder, and scaled wider than any stealth bomber in history, flying combat evaluation missions years ahead of when anyone predicted it would, with a production line already being told to build more before the first squadron has even stood up. Somewhere over Edwards Air Force Base right now, another test flight is underway. A pilot who, a year ago, was flying a legacy aircraft in an operational squadron is now writing the first chapters of how America will fight its next war from 30,000 feet, in an airframe most of the public has only seen in a single blurry photograph. When the history of this decade's air power race is finally written, it will not center on a dramatic unveiling or a viral press conference. It will center on this. While rival nations were still rendering their next bomber in propaganda videos, the United States was already flying combat evaluations in theirs. The bomber America won't let anyone see isn't hidden because it isn't ready. It's hidden because it already is. And the element of surprise is the one advantage no defense budget can buy back once it's spent.